I have been at the University of Kentucky in the College of Ag for about 20 years now. My area of expertise is around land use. I do a lot of comprehensive land use plans around central Kentucky and try to provide an unbiased perspective of what are the important components of a local economy. So I have been working with Fate Alliance for many years to try to estimate how important agriculture is, particularly the cluster that we see here in central Kentucky, to our region. I had the great joy of being on the Urban Service Boundaries Expansion Committee last fall, and was really kind of privy to see everyone's perspective about the future of Fayette County and the really difficult decisions that need to be made. And I thought it was going to be very cut and dry. I think the folks who are very pro-development and thinking about how do we provide important infrastructure and houses for our residents, I thought it was going to be a really easy battle. And it wasn't. There was great, conversations on both sides, but really kind of sealed the deal is when we took the tour around the city. And you could actually hear people sort of moaning and going, oh, on both sides. I mean, like, how are we going to make these decisions? And so my job really is to provide the best data and research that I can to help talk about this region and help make informed decisions. One of the greatest things, and I've been in Lexington now for about 18 years, is that Lexington is an amazing place. We are a very resilient community. Our economy looks great to an outside perspective. We have this amazing rural aesthetic that is wonderful for attracting and retaining families and businesses. But we're also growing. And so it really is, down to what are the decisions that we're going to make and how are we going to make them? So I will not be very long tonight. I actually thought it was dark out, but I see some light coming through, so it's good. It's really good. These are not trends from 2001 to 2024, but rather 2014 to 2024. But how many of you all have grown up and been a part of Lexington for over a decade? Right? Lexington is, I am an economic development specialist, so I train our economic developers all across the state. That's where I was all day today, talking about the importance of how we do attraction for industry, how we do business retention and expansion, how we grow entrepreneurs. And Lexington is like this perfect place. We have really great economic opportunities. Our wages have increased. Certainly, COVID has had a big impact in terms of how do we price our workers to provide value. Our unemployment rate, obviously, it peaked in COVID. We've returned to pre-COVID levels. We are a very diverse county, and I don't mean that in terms of race or ethnicity. I mean that in terms of our economic composition. And what's a testament to our area is that we have had significant business issues. We've had Lexmark, which is a really important part of our local economy, who has basically over time become smaller and smaller and smaller. And other places around this country would be devastated by that type of reduction in employment. Lexington is a place that can sort of just pick up and move on and try to figure out how do we get these displaced workers into other employment. We are very, very diverse. And so that means we are extremely resilient to changes in our economy. I use this pie chart, doesn't matter where I go, but when I use this pie chart as sort of, this is the ideal, right? We want to have a pie chart that shows the breakdown of our economy across all the different industries. And if I go to a place like Eastern Kentucky, it is like 3 big colors and very, very, very small slivers of others. And those 3 big colors are government, they're healthcare, and sometimes manufacturing, depending on where we are. This is a pretty nice pie chart. Like, these are all the colors. I think they ran out of colors as there was no other space there. For those who don't know, in Lexington, our largest employer, or in the MSA, is going to be healthcare. We are a healthcare community, whether we like it or not. At poor Brittany this morning. I was going to be late because I had this presentation at 1 o'clock. I was going to be even later because my stepdad, who just moved here from Baltimore, was rushed to the ER in an ambulance, right? And I was like, that's okay. We've got a great healthcare place. And so he's back home now. Yay. But that's what we're known for, right? We are known in our central Kentucky area for healthcare. It is a wonderful industry. It's an export industry, meaning money from outside comes in and generates new income. We've got manufacturing, we've got retail, we've got all this great stuff, right? And so this is something that is really, really important. I'm not going through this because Jim basically ruined any chances of me talking about any numbers tonight. But just to get a sense of, who's working, and we pay, we've got pretty good wages. Very few of our sectors pay kind of what we would consider below living standard wages. Retail is always going to be a bit of an issue, accommodations, the arts. But for the most part, we are a big reason why Kentucky has higher per capita incomes. What do we think the Lexington MSA is known for in terms of who are our big employers? UK, for sure. Hospitals. Who else beyond? Don't just think Fayette County. Think about all of our counties around us. Toyota. Agriculture, school systems, right? So you'll see here that these bubbles essentially are trying to identify the types of industries that do well in Lexington and have a lot of promise. So auto-related, certainly that should be up there because of our ties to Toyota and all of the other spillover industries that occur. Food manufacturing, we actually have a pretty significant number of employers across the state and within the region. Pharmaceutical, health, financial services. So these are the things that we do particularly well, which also means, with the exception of talking about a discussion around AI, we're pretty safe in terms of how things transition in the future. So what I have been doing over the last 10 years is trying to do a better job of visualizing the importance of the ag cluster in our region. And our region looks very different than other places. Obviously, we are a hot spot for the equine industry. We have some significant non-equine ag industries that are in the region. And so I have been trying to find a better way to capture what this really looks like. So and I feel like most of us here have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in the county. Our top 5 ag products: horses and other equine, breeding and other support services, cattle and calves. Big jump down after that to tobacco, and then grains and oil seeds. What has been the reason I started doing this, I think, was because I have some of my good friends who are in the College of Business and Economics. And when asked about what role does agriculture play in a community, they simply were just added and looked at on-farm employment and said, oh, well, on-farm employment is this, so agriculture accounts for 1% of employment. And in some parts of the world, that's a pretty good representation in parts of the country. But in places where there are clusters, whether it's ag, whether it's manufacturing, auto manufacturing, or whatever, that's a pretty short-sighted way of measuring the importance of a cluster. So, you said, what is the economic impact of Toyota? Really, no one would just say, let me just capture Toyota activities, right? But for Toyota, all of these other supporting sectors wouldn't be in the region, right? And so it was my task to try to figure out what are those other supporting businesses and how do they contribute to the local economy. Certainly, when we capture this on-farm employment, we don't see things like Root and Riddle and Haggard, right? They show up in a completely different industry. But for this equine sector, those hospitals wouldn't be here, right? Spicos, last time I heard the talk, it was every year I hear it, it's more and more activity that's talking about bringing new kind of economic activity into the region. So my job was to try to capture what that additional activity looked like. Lots of numbers, but let me just try to help frame this. Let me see, yes. And and because the cluster, Lexington is not that big compared to other large MSAs, we were really able to try to say, what are these businesses and how many people work there and how does it contribute? And so the typical analysis says, okay, let's just measure on-farm employment, which in Fayette County was, I think, 1% of employment, right? And so that immediately says, let's not talk about ag as an important industry. Other places around the country who have started doing this work have said, well, let's look at some of the real close linkages. Let's look at the stuff that goes into making a farm work, and let's look at that very next step in terms of kind of processing. And so you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, these kind of lavender colors, those are ag inputs, and then food processing and manufacturing. And you'll see here, like ag inputs would be construction, fencing, farm equipment, fertilizer, feed mills, and food processing, Greatest Mill, Brumfield Hay, and grain company. So that's become a little bit more standard in how we measure the value of ag. So we tried to take it a step further because a lot of the cluster that we see in Lexington and the greater area is really much bigger, right? And a lot of it has to do with equine, but not all of it. Like the bluegrass stockyards wouldn't be captured. Normally, we wanted to make sure they were captured. So we went through each of these bubbles and tried to inventory every business in Kentucky or in Lexington that falls under that. So we have like professional services. So we have veterinary, we have banking, accounting, insurance. We've got organizations and associations. We've got Kentucky Cattlemen's, we've got the Jockey Club, wholesale trade and distribution, so trucking, retail, tourism, communications, education, wineries and breweries, right? So now we're really trying to extend it beyond kind of that simple analysis. Whoops. And so these are brand new numbers. And good news, bad news is the good news is that these numbers haven't really shifted a lot. There hasn't been a tremendous growth. There hasn't been a tremendous decline. What we have typically done in the past is said, here are how many jobs are in this cluster. Here are how many jobs are in the county. And we'd say last time it was 1 out of every 12 jobs. Good news is that the base of Fayette County has increased. And so the number of jobs in the county have increased. And so that 1 in 12 number has become kind of a smaller fraction. However, when we do this, we find that there are just shy of 6,000 people who work in just ag and food. So it's those first 3 bubbles, the production in the middle and the 2 inputs and the processing. This column on the right is our work trying to identify all of the other businesses in the county. And when we started doing this in 2014, we literally went through the yellow pages and did all kinds of Google searches to try to find what those businesses are. We started off with, we have access to a business inventory, and we started doing that, and then we started digging deeper and deeper. And we went to websites and verified existence and verified employment by looking at staff and all that stuff. And so at the end of the day, we were able to capture another 4,600 folks that were part of this cluster. It's not huge. No one's saying that agriculture is the #1 driver of economic growth in the county. What we're saying is that alone, it accounts for about 11,000 people. When we start looking at the total impact, it grows a significant amount. And we're close to, I don't actually know if these numbers may not be actually correct. My math isn't adding up. So we've created this final impact, things that we have excluded. And in my work, what I try to do is make sure that we don't ever overestimate, because we understand that there are folks who have very different priorities and philosophies about the type of activity that should occur. And so we say, okay, we're going to be very careful how we talk about tourism, unless we know for sure what people are doing. And if we're the sole purpose for equine or ag, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to include banks, lawyers, insurance, until we are 100% sure that those jobs are attributed to ag. And at this point, I mean, it would just be mind-boggling to try to figure out exactly what that is. So we just say this is the minimum impact, right? And this is verified through websites and looking at people's websites. So it's a pretty significant number. Again, not the biggest number. You know, manufacturing, healthcare, education are going to be, and retail are going to be higher in terms of total numbers, but it's still important if you're just talking about the economic impact. What I like to then follow up with is to say, but that's not the whole story. It's an important part of our employment base, but it's a reason why this city and this region is able to attract and retain businesses, talent, because of this kind of rural landscape that the city allows. It is not by accident that people fly in over that airport, and by golly, when we were on that urban services boundary, and we talked about that close to the airport being a place, everyone, doesn't matter pro-growth, anti-growth, you know, whatever it may be, everyone said, no, 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 because they understood what it meant to fly into the bluegrass over those fields. It doesn't matter. They understood that was a driving factor. I moved here from Reno, Nevada. When I got on the plane to interview, I had 0% chance that I was going to come to the University of Kentucky. Reno. Now, what does Reno look like? Crap, right? It's brown. It's brown. There is no grass, right? And I flew into Kentucky, and immediately my mindset changed. And I left a day and a half later, and I was like, no matter what, if I'm offered this job, I'm coming. So when doctors come in from wherever, you know, these doctors that we tout, the first thing they do is drive them out of Old Frankfort Pike. I did that, and I tell this every year. I did that with one of my staff, went over a hill really fast, almost killed us, but the experience was there, right? And so there is sort of an intangible kind of economic importance of this landscape in terms of how we recruit and retain our innovative and talented workforce. Many, many years ago, we also asked folks, you know, how important is it to you to be near or to be able to have a view shed of the rural landscape? And basically asked them what our nosy economists called a willingness to pay study, and said, you know, if there was a tax or some type of fee imposed by the city to preserve our land, to keep it so that it continued to look similar to how it does today, would you be willing to contribute? And some people, and it's hypothetical, and it certainly runs across a significant amount of criticism, but in the academic world, it's actually acceptable based on how it's created. And some people said, nope, $0, right? We want jobs, blah, blah, blah. A lot of people said, yeah, I do it. So when we came up with our final estimate of what the willingness to pay, it was basically what it would cost to put a property in the PRD program. So it was pretty close to that, so it made us feel like we were on par. So again, my job is not to come out here and say only ag, or is it to say only healthcare, only education, only manufacturing. My job is to say that Lexington has a diverse economy, of which agriculture plays an important role of that. And it creates a community that is attractive for workers in all those other sectors. And that is it is a known fact. We went out and interviewed a bunch of employers. Again, this was when we first started doing the study in 2014, non-ag related employers, and said, how important is this community to you the way it is now? And they all said it's very valuable. It's how we get our folks to move here. And so with that, I do have one slide here, just to give you a sense of, and I think sometimes, you know, in our very kind of insular world, we think of, well, if a business shuts down, all right, well, it shuts down, right? My goal was to try to say, well, if we do have a loss in farmland, and we had 2,800 acres, just in this last round. What are the types of sectors that you would expect to also see kind of this trickle effect? And so on the right-hand column, you would see those types of sectors have significant impacts, which I think is really important because for some people, they just don't understand what it is until they see a sector that's really important to them. And they say, oh, well, that's something I never thought of before. We talk about some of the top jobs for ag jobs and ag-related jobs. Back to this cluster, and with that, I will definitely never, ever compete with Jim again, but that was still pretty good. For 8 o'clock at night, I'll take it.